Okay. Okay, then. All right. It is Tuesday, September 16th, 2025. Welcome, everyone. Been, was, it kind of struck me a few minutes ago that over the last few days, I've either read or encountered several people who are smarter than me. Like, and always interesting to just like sort of, oh, okay, yeah, that person's smarter than me. Um, and so I might sort of draw on some of those things if I can in my diminished intelligence uh, to, you know, see what we can figure out from the smart people. Okay. We will start with a period of meditation and then I'll talk. I actually got a few things on my mind, so I'm not sure where it's all going to land. See how the sitting goes and what emerges out of that. One of the smart people was that I was with Thanissaro Bhikkhu, who at least Paula is the one person here I see who was there. Hello, hello. Um, and despite the fact that, mostly due to my hearing, I couldn't hear most of what he said, which I was kind of grateful for. It was only a certain amount I wanted to hear. But I was sort of struck by his guided meditation, which was, um, and maybe I'll talk more about this, but rather than just observing the breath, which is the typical way of giving instruction in mindfulness meditation, he actively utilizes the breath, and so I quickly Googled, you know, I Googled Thanissaro Bhikkhu working with energy and breath, and guess who helped me out? AI says that Thanissaro Bhikkhu teaches that breath energy is the sensation of life force in the body, not just air entering the lungs, and the practice involves becoming sensitive to these subtle energies. The core practice is to observe the in and out breath, then expand this awareness to the entire body, experimenting with different breathing rhythms to find what feels most comfortable. The goal is to settle the mind, gain clarity on the mind-body connection, and overcome the mind's tendencies to create stress and tension. So I don't believe everything that comes up when I do little searches now that we get these AI responses, but that one seems pretty accurate. I'm gonna go with that because it sounds a lot like what he was saying on Saturday down at the Sati Center. So it's a good starting point for our meditation. So let's just begin by settling first into the body, into the posture, becoming aware of how you're holding your body. You can close your eyes or just lower your gaze. The intention is to move awareness out of the visual world, which tends to be very consuming and distracting. And then becoming aware of how your body feels right now, whatever that might mean. You know, how your body feels could relate to particular sensations, could be energetic, like sleepy or alert or even anxious or dull. It could, or if you're feeling ill, you might say when how your body feels is sick. Of course, there's much more detail that we can uncover when we ask this question. So part of this practice, at least as we work towards calm and settling, is to very objectively explore the different feelings in the body. A very simple one as it relates to meditation is the alignment of the body, the posture. Noticing if you tend to become rigid or if you tend to slump, and trying to find a kind of middle way, upright but not rigid, relaxed but not collapsing. So this is the practical choices that we make as we apply awareness to the body, as we feel the body. We adjust the posture to be most suitable for meditation. And then beginning to feel the breath in the body.
So, yeah, you take a seat for me.
So the initial, most simple way of feeling the breath is to feel the in-breath and the out-breath. So, a sense breaking the breath into two to start. Breathing in and breathing out. And noticing the distinct sensations of those alternating aspects of breath. We can then begin to use the breath, as Tanasaro suggests, to modulate our energetic state. That is, initially to bring calm to the body. You might feel the breath deep in the belly, softening the belly. And you can feel the breath as you exhale, the release of energy, the settling body, the balancing aspect of breath is the energizing aspect. There's the calming and there's the energizing. We emphasize one or the other as we sense the need for more energy or less energy, for more calm. As the mind intrudes on this reflection on breath, we let go of thinking, go of thoughts, and return to the feeling experience of breathing. And while we can divide the breath into the in-breath and the out-breath, as our attention becomes more refined, we see that there are more elements to the breath than just those two. That in fact the breath is one continuous flow of sensations and experiences after another, not actually divisible, but a constantly moving, shifting process. There is no one thing that we can call breath. Breath is many things, but even those things can also not be captured. that was kind of perfect. Um, Due to what I'm about to talk about, that my tissue box was up against the bell, and when I tried to ring it, it was deadened. Um, one of the I was referring to smart people that I've been reading or being with. So Tanasaru Ajinamuro, um, recently heard him on one of his talks say that Tanasaru Bhikkhu was one of the smartest people he ever knew, which is interesting. And as I always like to remind people who are insecure about their intelligence, there are many different kinds of smart, many different types of intelligence, and sometimes really smart people. Well, everybody has, you know, smart parts and not as smart parts. But I was also, I had been thinking about, because I've been talking so much about the nervous system in our meditation, and I had always I had heard from Wes Nisker years ago this quote from John Cage about the sound of that he heard when he was in a record in a what's called a what is it anechoic chamber. Again, smarter people than me know about these things. An anechoic, so an and then echoic, right? So something where there is no a room designed to absorb any and all sound waves, diffuse any echoes or reverberation, making it as close to silent as possible. And Cage said in his 1962 book Silence, which I now I have to get that book now. He said, when I described, so he heard two sounds when he was in this dead space. The When I described these two sounds later, the engineer in charge informed me that the high one was my nervous system in operation, the low one my blood in circulation. Um, and but the weird thing, I mean, this might be one of my less, you know, to say one of my less focused talks is really pushing it. But anyway, I found this quote. Again, we just search nowadays, just type in stuff and hope that the thing shows up. So it's in an article by an English professor called Suspicious Silence Walking Out on John Cage. And I started reading it a little while ago, like from the beginning, because I just was interested in the one quote. And it's just one of these, if any of you who may have suffered through critical theory or the kind of contemporary English department stuff which I was exposed to when I was at Cal in the early 90s. It's just impossible, like horrible writing and just impossible to understand. It's like meant to be really, uh, uh, if I could even find a sentence in here that's worth reading so that you would know what I'm saying. But anyway, it's just that sort of jargon-filled critical theory that just makes no sense. Um, People trying to be smarter than smart. Uh, anyway, there's one smart person who's not very smart. um, so I guess where I'm going to start is talking a little bit about Tanasaru's teaching on using the breath in our meditation, and then there is somewhere I want to take that, but um, when I was doing a particularly focused study on the Anapanasati Sutta a couple of years ago, and I wrote a book that's on my website because it was never published, so it's just a PDF if you want to read it, because it's it's my experience, but then compared with and with uh, like several other teachers, more, smarter teachers than me, better, more, anyway, who've written books on the Anapanasati Sutta. And so I'm sort of comparing my experience with what these different teachers say, and also comparing what they say to each other, and sort of partly trying to deconstruct the idea that there is one way of understanding the Anapanasati Sutta. So I guess I should back up for those who are not familiar with this term, and that the name, the Anapanasati. So Anapanasati Sutta is the it's the discourse on mindfulness of breathing. And so it sounds like the simplest thing in the world, how to be mindful of the breath. But if you actually read the core part of the sutta that's about breathing, turns out to be a lot more complicated. There are 16 steps in the sutta, and they parallel the four foundations of mindfulness. So there's body and feelings, mind states, and what I just call insights, you know, dharma, wisdom. So these four different sections of the sutta, each of which has four steps, and each of which involves being mindful of the breath, and then being mindful of the body with the breath, and then mindful of the breath and mindful of feeling with the breath, mindfulness of the mind with the breath, mindfulness of impermanence and different insights with the breath. So it's this really interesting challenge that the Buddha kind of puts to us to don't just focus on your breath, but be aware of these other aspects of experience and reality. And so we would call it an insight practice, but it also, in the process of working through these 16 steps, one also develops concentration. Okay, so that's a little background. Um, so just going back to the title of the sutta, if you're familiar with the four foundations of mindfulness, you might know that the four foundations of mindfulness are called, sutta is called Satipatthana. So sati is the word we translate as mindfulness, which I think is really not a great translation, but it's what we've got. And so if you look at that word anapanasati, it's in the chat if you're not looking at the chat. Sati is the last part of anapanasati, right? So what's anapana? We assume it must have something to do with the breath. So as far what the the translators of the Pali Canon, the experts, particularly Bhikkhu Bodhi and Venerable Nalio, say ana and pana represent the in-breath and the out-breath. Pana, though, according to Bhikkhu Bodhi, is the Pali for the same word in Sanskrit, which is prana, which you might be familiar with from your yoga classes. Pranayama. So pranayama is doing yoga with the breath. Now, prana, you might have a sense, if you have any echoing sort of meaning of that word, a sense it's in that Hindu and Brahmanic tradition, it's referring to more than just breath, but it's referring to breath as a life force. And here we can go back to Thanissaro and this AI explanation of it, where where it says, Thanissaro teaches that breath energy, and that's in quotes, is the sensation of life force in the body. So he's agreeing with this yogic version of the word pana or prana, panya maybe. And and we can contrast that with, as I was saying earlier on, the ordinary way of saying mindfulness of the breath is just being aware, and then we use these different language, watching the breath, or feel, or what are we doing? Feeling the sensations of breath. Either one of those points to the idea that we're not manipulating the breath or using the breath in a purposeful way, that we are just observing it in some sense. Either this, like watching it is a sort of doesn't really make sense, but it again, it's sort of metaphorical, but feel. Usually, I will say, pay attention to the sensations of the breath, so feeling the breath. Now, if you pay attention to the feeling of the breath for a while, it will tend to calm the mind. But when you use it in this more intentional way, as Tanasaru is mentioning, and I will say that Thich Nhat Hanh also really talks about using the breath in these kind of ways. You realize that you can influence your physical and mental states through the ways that you work with the breath. So, and this is we have to be very careful with this. This is one of the reasons why the sort of typical way of teaching mindfulness of the breath doesn't include this, is that it's, if we are not wise or sort of understand this process enough, we could easily start to try to make things happen in a grasping way and trying to force the breath to accomplish things. And you'll have yoga teachers say, don't hold your breath, and you know they'll be gentle with the way they offer it, not to kind of push. And so, but when one becomes a bit more adept at working with mindfulness of breathing, one can start to gently, and I like the phrase, incline the mind or incline the attention toward d- raising or settling energy, or, spreading energy. And we hear language like this, particularly in the metta teachings, actually, radiating kindness over the entire world. And I've been talking about this a bit, that, you know, radiating kindness, it's sort of, you know, again, just metaphorical. You're just imagining something, right? It's a visualization. But we find that if the mind is ready, when we practice, when we sort of visualize or try to get some felt sense of radiating kindness, that there is this sort of energetic uplift that happens. And so we're doing the same thing here with the breath, where kindness is a very specific, you know, mood or feeling we're trying to convey. With the breath, we're generally working just with these contrasting energies of uplifting or calming, so stimulating or settling. And you can uh, correspond those two energies with ana and pana. That is, the in breath is the uplifting energy, and the out breath is the calming energy, just very naturally, right? When you breathe in, the body rises just slightly. When you breathe out, the body settles slightly. And so when you're trying to sort of cultivate these energies, you visualize or feel, and I guess Tanasaru has his own language for this, um, that these different, you just kind of feel into or lean into the rising or the falling energy. Now, this needs to be done in coordination, or in along with awareness of what is my energy right now and what would be helpful. So this became particularly clear to me back in late August when I was teaching a couple of retreats. I was falling asleep a lot. I mentioned this, I guess, on Friday night for the Spirit Rock class. I was falling asleep a lot and like 30 minutes into the 45-minute sit. So I was like having, a good sit. Like I was having a relative clarity and calm and it seemed, seemed pleasant. And then I would tip over into that sleepy state. And many of you have enough practice to know exactly what I'm talking about, that, you can sit for a while and everything can seem steady, and then you get too much calm. And this is because classically we need to balance concentration and energy. And this is one of the teachings, it's in the five spiritual faculties: mindfulness, energy, mindfulness, faith, energy, concentration, wisdom. I'm not sure they're always in that order, but anyway. So energy and concentration need to be balanced. So much of the time, particularly in daily meditation, people sit down and they have too much energy, right? You're probably very familiar with that. Like you're anxious or your mind is going really fast. On retreat, it can often tip the other way, that things get very settled, but then there's not enough wakefulness. And so, to a degree, we can't control these states. We have, but we can sort of work with them, as Thanissaro is suggesting. And one of the ways to work with them is with the breath, but we can also work with them with these kind of visualizations of radiating kindness over the entire world, or just imagining that energy is rising up through the spine, up through the body. You can think about this in terms of the chakras, if you're familiar with that system, these different energy spots in the body, and sort of move. So again, this requires real subtlety. We can't be like, I'm just going to make this happen. But when you're sitting and you're pretty settled, you start to tune into these subtle energies and you start to feel different energies in different parts of the body. And so if you find you're kind of like, oh, I'm tipping over here, I'm starting to fall asleep, just to, you fix your, reset your posture, but then you just sort of bring the energy up. And I can like to even take it up out into space. I mean, again, this is what the suttas on loving kindness says: radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, right? So this is just a way of playing with energy, and you can use it with the breath, or you can use it with visualization, or really, I would say, combining the two in a sense. So that's, a starting point for something to talk about today. Um, but I want to take a little bit of a shift since I have time. I've been talking a lot about energetic states and the nervous system and being aware of that kind of vibratory quality in that John Cage is talking about, hearing the nervous system, feeling the nervous system in the body. The breath too has this quality of energetic quality. Thanissaro is talking about it in physical terms. And I was in the guided meditation, I was saying you can start out by dividing your breath into two things. an in-breath and an out-breath, ana and pana. And that's a helpful way to focus the mind to feel, oh, there's this sensation and then there's that sensation. And it helps us to start to be mindful of what does the breath feel like? Because even saying be mindful of the breath is kind of a vague idea, at least in the English language. So we divided, oh, what's an in-breath feel like? What's the out-breath feel like? After a while, we start to see that, oh, well, the in-breath, it begins, it has a middle, it ends. The out-breath begins, middle, end. Start to see, oh, it's made up of more than just two things. There's a few things happening. And then as you tune in, if you just reflect on what's happening and feel the in-breath, you realize that it's one steady stream of sensations. But maybe it's not a steady stream of sensations. It's more like a stream of sensations. And what's a stream? A stream is something that is continuously moving, that's made up of different elements in every tiny micro moment. So we start to realize that the breath, the way I like to describe it, and I don't know if this will come through on Zoom, but it's like a rat. That's the in breath. And the out breath there. But each of those rat-tat-tats is also has infinite numbers of rat-tat-tats in it. And so what we conclude is that the idea of breath is just an idea. So we have the word breath, and we believe it's referring to a thing. And then we say that that thing is, well, there's an in breath and an out breath. Okay, now we have two things. But where is the thing is the question. What is the thing? Is it the beginning, the middle, or the end? Is it one of those little things? No. What we would say is the breath is this collection of experiences, which is, and none of those so-called, none of that collection of, none of those so-called experiences is any more graspable as a thing, as a static thing, than the whole breath. So we have this word, and state, a mind state, which refers to something that's static, but we can't find anything that's actually static. So I'm just using the breath as an example because I think it's a really good example of something that has no, that is not static. We can see that it's not static. It's not stable. It's never, there's no, and when we break it down in this way, we can see that there's no one thing that we can point to that is the breath. And so what I want to talk about a little bit for these few minutes is that this idea of self, of when we hear this idea of not self in Buddhism, there's an immediate tendency for us to associate it with me and maybe with you. That is to say, we associate the idea of not self with people. But that is not the meaning of not self. Breath also is not self. There is no self of breath. In other words, there is no breath. That's just an idea. It doesn't exist as a thing. A thing in human, language refers to something static, something stable, something that existent. And that when we look at the breath, we realize that there's no point at which we can describe it in those terms. Breath is not a thing. So this is just an example of the fact that nothing has a self, which, kind of reminds me of nobody for president. But anyway, it's a kind of a Zen thing. No, there is no thing anywhere that we can grasp onto. And so people struggle so much with this idea of, oh, there's no self, but what about this? And then sort of trying to make it, well, maybe all those changing things are the self. But, in any case, I think it's helpful in trying to understand the concept of not self to take it away from the human realm and point it to something else so that you can see clearly there is no breath. We have language that's useful for describing this process. And we need that language, and we need to understand things as a process or even as things, because we couldn't function in the world if we didn't have the idea of things. But to realize that it's just an idea, it's not reality. Reality is that there is no thing, that there is no breath, that there is nothing to hold on to. And this is why this is actually that what when people fully understand this, it blows their mind. Like, and that's kind of a good way of actually describing what happens because we if there's no thing, how can you play the game of clinging? If there's if there's no thing for you to ever, there's nothing that can be held. There's nothing that can be clung to. It's all just process. It's all just energy moving. It's it's really a disruption of our understanding of reality. And it is that disruption that's the breakthrough of satori or enlightenment or awakening, where there's this, you know, letting go that's profound because in order to operate in this belief system that allows us to cling mentally, we have to see the world as full of things that are static. And when we clearly, completely see that that just is not the case, then we can't hold on to that belief system anymore. And that's the realization of the Four Noble Truths. Yeah, that's the letting go that is the third noble truth. So, kind of interesting. I hope that that made sense. You guys watch me, trying to find my way through these uh, ideas from week to week. So, and I know people often struggle with not self. Um, and I am one of my goals is to find ways to talk about this that are like, oh right, okay, like it's not a belief in Buddhism. There's no belief that there's no self, and you don't have to believe it. The Buddha's not trying to get you to sign on to his faith, the no self religion. And so people, but then it's also not truly an idea, an intellectual idea. I mean, you can see the nature of this idea itself is that how can it be a static, like, how can I hold on to the idea of not self, right? Doesn't make sense. So it's only something that can be known and just known, like you just know. And the words and the language and the talking about it are just ways to help people for that to click. Um, so anyway, there's a couple minutes left if anybody wants to comment. All right, John, go ahead. Make trouble.
So is using the word transitory, I mean, like trying to identify anything, right, is our
Yeah, yeah,
challenge here.
yeah, yeah,
But so if I try to say this is myself, it's not, a millisecond, 1 millionth of a second later, it's not. Is
yeah.
that close?
Yeah, that's definitely the issue. I mean, the the first thing that the Buddha talks about when he explains this to the monks is, everything is impermanent. Your form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness are all impermanent. They're constant. And impermanent has this, it's not even another like problematic word because it sounds like, oh, well, it exists for a while and then it ends. But that's not what it means. Anicca means it's in constant flow. It's transitory. It's there's no moment at which it exists and then stops existing. It's not like it didn't exist and then it did exist and then that's like, birth, aging, death. That's not the ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is that there's no moment at which something exists as a self, some essential, stable thing. It's all continuous change. It's all just change. It's kind of crazy, I mean, it's crazy. That is to say, sometimes people go crazy when they realize this. If they don't have like the practice, the Buddhist meditation and Buddhist teachings are actually meant to give you the power to absorb this truth without going crazy. So the meditation itself and the capacity to calm the body, calm the mind, is needed in order to live with this reality, which disrupts everything that we rely on. There's nothing to rely on, right? And so this practice and sila, samadhi, that's panya. So the three stages of Buddhist practice, sila is the moral and ethical foundation of living a wholesome life so that you're living in a stable reality, just in practical terms. And then you develop samadhi, this stability of mind, that then you have this apparently stable life lifestyle, with an apparently stable mind. And then you see the contingent reality of it all, that none of it is actually stable. But because you've developed this capacity, which we can just call equanimity, a mind which is able to hold this reality, then you can manage it. But if you jump into it, as sometimes happens to people by accident, it can be very destabilizing. And people sometimes have this experience on retreats, or they just have it, when they see a dead body or something shocking like that, that they realize, whoa, the reality that I thought I was living in was an illusion. Oh my God, I can't handle it, because there can be this panic. It's one of the stages in what's called the progress of insight, which is one description of this developmental process. They call it the rolling up the mat phase. When you see the impermanent nature of all things, and you haven't developed equanimity to hold it, the mat is like your meditation mat. You roll it up because you're like, I'm out of here. I can't do this. This is too much. Um, so yeah.
Thanks.
So take it easy. Don't don't try to figure everything out at once. Just keep practicing sila and samadhi. I mean, I'm very, one thing about me, I really trust in this process. And I really believe that if you live with sila and develop samadhi, mind training, not just concentration, but training the mind, that the wisdom that comes out of that, it will be perfect, and that your practice will develop at the pace it needs to develop. Some people get enlightened in this lifetime. Other people have to wait longer. But if you're living sila with sila, then um, it's going to go well. It's one of the beautiful things about sila, and sila is recovery. Sila is sobriety, and that's what we have. It's why people in the Buddhist recovery world tend to have wholesome spiritual lives that develop um, in I don't how do I want to characterize it without setting up expectations. Um, like it develops like nicely. I don't know. I don't have a word for it. Like it's smoothly might be a good way to describe it. Which doesn't mean there aren't bumps, but I mean that it, that I've run over, and I understand some people need to leave, but my early practice, that those of you who've read One Breath at a Time know, like, I jumped in to meditation practice without sila. I jumped into samadhi without sila, and I the way I view it now is that I had a traumatic experience on the 3-month retreat that I reacted to by, 6 months later, leaving the whole Buddhist community and following a, New Age guru and becoming wound up homeless. And that was because I didn't have the foundation of sila. It was only after I got sober that I started to build a really wholesome and a progressive, and I mean a spiritual life that progressed in a natural and constructive way. Um, so that sila is really, it's irreplaceable. Well, in any case, thank you all for for coming, for dropping in or dropping out or whatever you're dropping, letting go.
Tune
Uh,
in, tune out.
what was that? Which,
Oh, like Timothy Leary,
right,
I can
tuning
never
in, yeah.
say it right, so everybody
Right, tune in,
laughs.
turn on, drop out, turn on, tune in. Anyway,
Yeah.
well, we've done the turning on part, and we've turned that off. So tune in, turn off. It's more like it. All right, so nothing else on my calendar. Paula's got something going on. Do you want to share about that, Paula, this weekend, the Dhammadarini retreat?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, in Foster City, there's a day long with the monastics, female monastics from the Dhammadrini community. I wasn't prepared, so I don't have my flyer, but
I'm going to grab it for you.
you can also go to dhammadrini.net, and there's a lot of information on there about their retreats and their teachings. It's a really wonderful female monastic training community. And right now, beautiful. Right now, there are 11 bhikkhunis for the Vasa from 5 different countries, ranging in age from 25 to 72, all practicing together. So this is a really wonderful opportunity in Foster City it's a Dana-based day long. So thanks for bringing that up, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was just looking at it this morning. Yeah, so I just put a link to the event in the chat if people, if you click on that before we close the class. And obviously, just for people in Northern California, unless someone wants to fly in, but generally that would be the gang. So yeah, thanks, Paula, for supporting them and doing all the great work you're doing with them. Yeah. All right, folks. I will be back here next Tuesday, God willing, and the earthquakes don't just collapse my house on my head, and whatever, the golf ball doesn't crush me. I would, hit me in the head, whatever.
Take care of yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I'm trying. All right,
Thanks,
everybody.
Kevin.
Peace.
See
Have
you
a
next
great
week.
day.
Thank you.
Stay
Kevin.
safe. Yeah.